Well, welcome to the Seed Saving, Seed Cleaning Workshop. My name is Jordan Bouchard. I'm a member of the Ottawa Seed Library, and I do run a very small seed saving operation at the Just Food Farm. And in the workshop today, you'll also notice that there's Rong here is with us. She's another volunteer member of the Ottawa Seed Library, and Manish is here as well. And so I don't think Tara is here yet. She is not, but we're members of or have been members of the Ottawa Seed Library for a long time. And we all are very nuts about seed saving. So we're here to share as much as we can with everyone who's interested. So the Ottawa Seed Library is a program that's interested in sharing seeds and spreading seed-saving information to gardeners and farmers all over the Ottawa region. There's many libraries all across North America that trade and exchange and seeds and seed knowledge, and they all come in a variety of different shapes and styles and different scales too. At the Ottawa Seed Library, we're predominantly focused on home gardeners, and we're interested in getting seeds out to gardeners, training and giving information on how seed savers can save seeds. And then at the end of the year, they return back a portion of the seeds saved, and the rest they can keep themselves and distribute to other friends or family if they choose, or grow a really, really big garden the next year. We've been operating for 3 or 4 years now, and each year we're getting more and more members, and it's a lot of fun. We're seeing our steering committee is now over, I think, about 10 people. So we meet every couple of months and go over some of the activities we want to plan. We're all volunteers at this point. The Ottawa Seed Library is part of an organization called Just Food. They are a regional, a city and regional food, what is it? That works towards just and sustainable food and farming systems. I used to work for Just Food. I do not anymore, so my memory of how to introduce them is very, very poor. I apologize. But Just Food has a number of programs that are related to food and farming, including the Community Gardening Network, Saver Ottawa. They have the Startup Farm program and the Just Food Farm, which is located in Blackburn Hamlet, and that's where they're headquartered as well. This workshop is being hosted by Just Food. You see that there's a participant named Community Gardening as part of this workshop, and that is Shan, who is the current coordinator of the Community Gardening Network. So thanks very much to them for allowing us to use the platform for this workshop tonight. So that's enough for the introduction. We'll start getting into the meat of why we're here. So today we're going to be focusing primarily on how to clean different types of seeds, and we're going to go through a lot of the basics for a lot of your common, easier vegetable varieties, and what you do from harvest until you put them away for the winter. I also want to thank the Organic Seed Alliance and Seeds of Diversity for the pictures and the baseline of this presentation. Kate Green was one of our founding members of the Ottawa Seed Library. She put together a large amount of all of our seed-saving presentations, and we're recycling all of the work that she does. A big thanks to Rong and Manish for putting together the videos that also form part of this workshop. Sorry, my presenter notes aren't visible. So we're looking at two broad categories of seeds at the highest level. You got your dry seeded crops and your wet seeded crops. And so when we go over the steps for how to save a bean or a lettuce, those crops are both going to be dry seeded crops. And so there's going to be some slight differences between how you would do them. A bean seed is obviously really, really big compared to a lettuce seed. But fundamentally, they're not that dissimilar, and so any techniques you're using for lettuce or beans are more interchangeable. And the same goes for the wet seeded crops: your tomatoes, your squash, you know, your cucumbers, these sorts of crops, they do have different techniques, but once you saved seed from a bunch of wet seeded crops, a bunch of dry seeded crops, I think you'll start to see the patterns and be able to come to conclusions about what techniques you would use uh, for any crop in your garden. Uh, I've been saving melon seeds the last couple of years, and originally I was saving them more like squash seeds. And you know, I looked at them, and I wasn't that happy with my results. And so then I used a technique that's more similar to like a tomato with my melon seeds, and I was happier with the outcome. And so that's just an example of when you're looking at a crop and you're familiar with all the techniques, you can start just kind of shifting what you were doing just by comparing to other crops. Um, Before you get cleaning, of course, the timing of your harvest and seed cleaning is very important. Um, if you're trying to save a pea seed, you have to actually wait till it's at its seed stage. So the timing is very important for a lot of those crops. Peas we like to eat when they're green, they're pliable, they're soft, they're very nice tasting. If you tried to save the seed at that time, you'd have just a whole bunch of moldy peas, and they wouldn't give you any viable seed. So I mean, that's an extreme example, but it's important to find the right time to harvest all of your crops. So um, for dry seeded crops, this is normally after we'd eat them. Um, Beans, you know, we can eat dry or green beans, of course, but the green beans, you have to wait till they dry down on the plant. Uh, when you're talking about lettuce seeds, it's going to take 6 weeks beyond the point that we would be eating them in order for their seeds to be ready. Um, you know, there's a few other things to consider when you're timing your harvest. One of the things I'm always most nervous about is when my lettuce or bean seeds are just ripening up and the plants are starting to dry down. And of course, I check the weather and there's a big rainstorm coming. So then when that happens, it makes me really nervous because it's a trade-off. You know, I can leave them out in the field a little bit longer and maybe I'll have more seed mature after the rain, or it's going to rain at the worst time, and all my nice dry seed is going to get soaked and it's going to germinate on the plant, or it's going to get knocked off the plant by the rain. So more often than not, I tend to try to time it before a rain, try to get as many you know, days as I can. But with this climate in this region being fairly damp in autumn, I'm usually just dancing harvests in between rains. It's kind of a frustrating piece, but it is what it is in this region. This year I had a lot of beans that first they were wet and then we got a frost, so I was ending up having to harvest my yellow beans right before the frost, and they weren't mature. And I'm still trying to dry them in my garage, and they're not doing that well. The frost that we had out in the East End here was September 13th, which is quite a bit earlier than normal. So it's an imperfect science. I mean, sometimes you get a nice warm autumn that's super dry and your seeds do really well. And other years it's raining constantly and you can't find a way to get your seed inside nice and dry. Typically, when you're looking to know how a crop is dry, is you're looking at the stems and the seed pods themselves. Usually once they're starting to turn brown or a lighter color, you know, away from green, that means they're closer to drying. If you wait too long, seeds will just shatter off the plant. That's one of the mechanisms that plants have developed to naturally distribute seed. So do be aware of that. I've noticed borage is one flower crop I've been growing, and it's like the second the seed ripens, it's just like that. The seed just falls right off the plant all over the ground, and I can't get any of it. So it is a thing that as it's ripening, you're going to want to be watching it every day. Most dry seeded crops will ripen from the oldest to the newest flowers. So when you're looking at a plant and you see where the first flowers are emerging, sometimes it'll be the top, sometimes it'll be the bottom. Depends on the plant. But they'll ripen in that order. So when you're looking at a lettuce plant, some of your top seeds might already be shattering and some of your bottom seeds might not quite be ripe. So you got to try to figure out what's the best time to pull them off the field. If you have a smaller crop, some people, what they'll do is they'll take like a paper bag from the grocery store, and they'll go up to their lettuce plant and they'll stick the plant into the bag, and they'll just sort of, knock the seeds into the bag. And they'll do that every couple of days, and in that way they'll maximize the amount of seeds they're getting off the plant. Others at a larger scale will wait until about half the seeds are ready, and then they'll cut the entire plant and take it inside, and then let it dry for 2 more weeks inside. And you might get, 3/4 of the ripe seed that way. But you only have to harvest it once, and you're not going to get quite as much as if you're knocking it off every single day. Um, and I think I'm scooping some of my later workshop slides, so I'm going to move forward. For your wet seeded crops, it's optimal when they're really, really ripe. So your tomatoes, they're going to be on the riper side of the spectrum. You're going to want them to be really, really red. Sometimes harvesting them even after the point that you would even eat them is a really good way to go to get really healthy seed from your tomatoes. Zucchinis are another crop that's strange when you're saving seeds, because when you eat them, you want them right when they sprout on the vine and the fruit is visible. But in order to save the seeds, they're going to stay on the plant another 4 to 6 weeks longer. And they might be orange. They'll look more like a pumpkin, a big long pumpkin, but more like a pumpkin. Um, so you wouldn't want to eat them at that point. They may not taste very well. Cucumbers as well. We eat them when they're green typically, except for a few varieties that are meant to be grown that are selected for different coloration. But typically they're going to be yellow or orange when you harvest them. And then even your winter squash is going to be optimal if you harvest them like in the photo here. Those are ripe potty marron squash and delicatas. And so if you harvested the seeds that day, you wouldn't get bad seed, but it would be optimal to let them sit and cure for 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, depending on how much patience you have. Because the longer they're in the squash, the more energy the squash is going to be giving to its seeds to get plumper and better seed. I'm sure there are diminishing returns to that. It's not going to happen indefinitely, but from the resources that I've been reading, just make sure they're cured at least 4 weeks, and you should be fine. But the winter squash is one of the few crops that the seeds are perfect at the same time as eating, and you can take out the seeds and save them, and you can also eat the fruit at the same time. So drying your seeds. I mean, we talked about timing of the harvest to make sure you're pulling them off the field at the right time, and sometimes that's going to be when the crops are pretty dry. In the photo here, you see that they're not that dry, and a lot more often than not, we'll be pulling them off before they're perfectly dry. And so this photo is showing you one technique that you can use, which is putting them in a warm, dry place, and just letting them sit like this for a few weeks. And this will end up making the pods brittle and a lot easier to get the seeds out of them. So they're like, you want it in an optimal situation. I think you're storing it in a well-ventilated, sunny, dry area. So to me, it's like an unused greenhouse or something like that, or with clear plastic, or a sunroom with a lot of windows. Those are kind of your optimal places as far as I'm concerned. I've noticed the seeds turn a darker color, the pods get darker faster, and I don't have much spoilage in my crop when I dry them in sunny, out of rain areas. But if you can't get into a sunny area, putting it in a dry area like your garage is perfectly fine, just out of the rain. In some wet years, I've used a dehumidifier in my garage, which it's a bit of a crazy thing to do, but it did work well, and I was able to salvage a garlic crop, which of course doesn't grow from seed, but I was able to save the crop from rot, and I've also done the same thing with beans and lettuce and all that as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it. I mean, your house, once your forced air heating turns on, if you're lucky enough to have a forced air heating house, that's also a really good place to finish your seeds. Of course, if you have a lot of them, you know, don't wade into a marital feud or anything like that for the sake of keeping your seeds dry. But basically there's a lot of different options you can take to try to store your seeds for drying. We do have a video of what Manish does, or some of the techniques he uses for drying seeds. So the video audio may be a little quiet, so I'll give you a few seconds to turn up your audio, and then once the video is over, I'll give you a few more seconds to turn it back down, and just so I don't accidentally shatter your eardrums. So 5 seconds from now.
So there are a couple of methods you can use for seed drying. I made bags out of a curtain fabric paper, a curtain fabric, and the water will go through this. So I just hang them, and they will dry just like that. You can also use screens to be able to dry things. In this case, I'm using screens. So another thing is labeling. Labeling is very important in seed processing. I didn't have a pen. I lost my pen somewhere.
We'll talk about labeling more throughout the workshop, so don't worry too much about that last point. But those are two good examples of things you can use to save your seeds. You know, nylon socks are another thing you can use, or pillowcases, old curtains, screens, old windows, many different things like that will allow you to increase the airflow over your seed crops. So now we're going to get more into specific techniques for specific types of vegetables. So beans are one of the easier seed crops you can clean, you can grow and eat and save seeds from. And fundamentally, they're a very beginner-friendly crop. They're very conducive to very small amounts of plants forming the foundation of the crop that you'll harvest. They're kind of a foolproof crop to grow, provided you have enough sun. They're big seeded, so they're easy to plant, and when they come up, they're really easy to find, and they outcompete the weeds really quickly. And then when you're trying to save the seeds, I mean, it's really obvious what's a seed, and they're really easy to get out of the pods, you know, if you're wanting to slip them right out. So for most beginner seed savers, I typically recommend a bean. The bean in the photo here is an orca bean, which is actually a bean that's meant to be eaten dry. And normally you can tell which seeds are meant to be eaten dry because the beans are pretty. When the beans aren't as pretty, you can generally assume that they're a green or a yellow bean or something like that that's meant to be eaten fresh. But whether you're saving fresh beans or dry beans, the techniques are very, very similar. One of the hallmarks of seed saving, of course, is saving the best and eating the rest. And so when you're going to be saving your bean seeds, you want to make sure that your favorite plants are the ones that you earmark for harvesting. And it's a really frustrating problem to have as a seed saver, but when you look at all your plants and you have your nice perfect beans that are the right length, right shape, nice and straight, you're going to want to eat those. And that's unfortunately not what we do with seed savers. We're better off eating the bad beans and letting the good beans go to maturity, and we miss eating them. But then next year, those form the foundation of your next crop. So the next year, your bad beans are going to be as good as your good beans this year. And that's kind of the goal. It's seed saving is a game of patience. And it never feels like you're going to get the crop that you want. But then, you know, eventually, once you do all these good selections and you start having even your marginal crops be spectacular, that's when you know that your patience was worth it. And then you'll be able to save the fruits of your labor, literally, with your friends and family, and make sure that their beans are top notch as well. So again, these are green beans. So you'll find the ones you like when you would eat them. And these would be the beans that maybe don't show much disease, have good flavor. You know, you can eat one or two of those to make sure the beans on the plant taste good. They have the right shape or color that you're looking for. Maybe the plants are very vigorous. If you planted them in a weedy area and you didn't get to pull the weeds out in time, the ones that are above the weeds, maybe those ones grow faster, they're more vigorous. Maybe that's the trait you want in your seed. So just identify the ones that you like, set them aside, make sure those are the ones that go to seed. Later in the summer, you'll come back and this is what they'll look like. You know, they're on the vines, they're a little dry. Again, like I said, if you're going to get an early frost or it's going to rain, maybe you'll pull them out a little sooner than this. But when a bean starts to look like this, you know, you're pretty close to a harvest. Some of the seeds are still, even though that coloration is there and it looks like they're ready to like plant in the ground for next year, they're still going to be pretty soft. So even though the beans look like this, more often than not, you're still going to want to put them indoors or out of the rain for a few more weeks. I say more often than not because, of course, there's exceptions to every rule in seed saving. But definitely leave the pods, make sure your beans are really, really dry before you move on to the next steps of threshing. The simplest and most brutish way that I could suggest checking for seed ripeness is hitting it with a hammer. If it squishes, it's not dry. If it shatters and becomes kind of dusty, then it's nice and dry and ready to move on to the next step. And what is that next step? Well, Manish is going to show us a quick technique. This is how to thresh your beans.
Okay, good. Yeah. Good. So we're gonna go over threshing. In seed cleaning, threshing is very important aspect. Most of the plants will have seeds in their pods, and pods have to be dry enough to be able to thresh. In this case, we have bean pods, as you can see, and they are quite dry. They are like very crunchy and crispy, and they will break very easily. So, and how to thresh? Just find a bin like this, and just step on it until you can crush it. As you can see, the beans are fallen off their pods in the base of it. Now you can winnow it by fanning it out. So I'm gonna try that with a different bean. This one, same idea here.
We had to cut the video to go to the next section, so we'll get to talking about winnowing and you get to see what the next step is. Obviously, this is only one way that you can thresh beans, and when you're using many crops, I think, or many plants, I think this is a really, really good technique. Honestly, even when I'm doing a small amount of plants, I think this is a really good technique, but it's not as precise as some gardeners might like to be. So if you also have the patience, what you can do is you can be watching TV and you can take your dried bean pods and you can, you know, split them while you're watching TV. And that might save you time on, sorry, my printer just kicked in. But if you're gonna split the pods by using your hands, just be careful because sometimes the pods are a little sharp and it can be a little hard on your hands if you're doing it that way. When your beans are good and dry, I do highly recommend this method, but you know, there's no real wrong way to end up extracting beans from their pods. Whatever you're most comfortable with will certainly work. This way I just find is really fun. So after you thresh your beans, and this goes for every crop, the sequence, right, is your harvest, you dry it, you thresh it, you'll winnow it, winnow or screen. We'll talk about screening a little bit later. And then once you're done that step, then you'll be able to get into storage. So in this video, Manish is going to show or demonstrate what winnowing is and how it works for beans. And anyway, and then this is why the threshing technique that he used is so efficient. So I'll give you a few seconds to turn your volume up in case you need it.
Yeah. So winnowing is another important concept in seed cleaning, and here we have, as we saw with beans, we thresh them. There's another beans here, as you can see. This is with the after they have been threshed. So we can use fan as one way for winnowing. People use different kinds of machines. There are specialized seed cleaning machines you can use, but this is good enough. So you place your bin in such a way that the heavier seed would go in the very front bucket, and the lighter and lighter seeds would go in the further buckets. And so with beans, because it's very heavy, so it will most likely be in the first bin. So just place it towards the first bin, pointing towards the first bin, and as you can see, it did a fairly good job in terms of cleaning. But you have to run it a couple of more times to be able to get a full.
So from that, you can see how stomping on your beans and running them through a fan is a pretty efficient process compared to hand threshing them all. In the end, you could probably do something like 10 pounds of beans, which is probably 50 feet in 2 rows in a crop, and you can probably do that in less than an hour with this technique. But the trade-off is you have to wait a couple weeks for the entire plant to dry down in a dry area. This is the second pass of the beans, so that we can see another angle of what it looks like.
Okay, so we are running our beans a couple of times to be able to get a clean batch. As we saw in the last video that we had beans fairly well cleaned, but now we're gonna clean 100%.
There's always a little bit of a clump that's you have to get over.
As you can see, the second batch is fairly clean as compared to the first batch. And here you will also see some seeds here. So you could run another batch and save these seeds, but they are lighter seeds, so the quality of them might not be as good as these ones. So we will run this another batch, but for me, like, having 4 or 5 seeds left has no value, so we're gonna run this again.
And that's a good point that Manish brings up in that video. The heavier seed is your best quality seed, and it's going to last the longest in storage. So even if you're saving more seed by running that through a second time, once you put those seeds in storage, there's no guarantee that they're going to stay viable for as long as the rest of your seed. So then the question is, should you what is it worth it to some degree, right? Earlier in the workshop, I was talking about my melon seed saving, and one of the benefits I found from my switch of technique was that the lightest seeds all floated to the top. And again, this is going to make more sense when we talk about tomato seed saving, but the lightest seeds basically just left my lot. And so then when I was looking at the seeds with the new technique that I did, I was much happier with the quality of the seed that I was left over with. And so that is a very important concept, because the better the seed you have, the longer that the entire lot is going to be consistent and going to be healthy. Let's watch Manish winnow his beans through one last time, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Yeah, it's recording. So this is our beans after 2 times of winnowing. This is almost ready to go. we'll do a third time, and the seeds will be like perfectly clean.
I've also seen some seed savers put 2 fans back to back to get a stronger wind tunnel, and that way you can shorten how many times you do it, but use what you got. Take out a few last sticks.
As you can see, these beans are almost clean.
The last step of any winnowing process is often just picking out the bad beans and some of the heaviest sticks and stones that get stuck with you. I use a couple of cookie sheets. I spread out all my beans and I just pick them out with my hands. The more surface area you can spread them out over, the faster it's going to be. I did want to take some time to talk about bean weevils. This is a very specific problem that happens to bean and pea crops, but there's a very simple solution. So when your beans are green, there's a little insect that's going to come and land on your beans, and they're going to lay eggs in the seed pods. And then if you clean your seeds, put them in jars, put them on your shelf, and you come back in May, you're going to find a whole bunch of sawdust in your jar. And what will have happened are the bean weevils will have hatched from their eggs, probably in November, December. And then they're just going to start eating your bean crops until they run out of food. And that means all your beans are going to be destroyed. So what I like to do is after my beans are dried and cleaned, I then put them in the freezer for a minimum of 3 days. And what the freezer does is it ends up killing the insect eggs that the bean weevils have laid. And just by putting them in the freezer for 3 days and then taking them out again, you'll ensure that the bean weevils are destroyed, and you can save your lot on a shelf for up to 5 years. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that we address that at this time, because there's nothing more frustrating than after your first lot of beans are saved that a random insect is chewing through all of them. The crucial thing to make sure when you're putting your beans in the freezer is just to make sure that they're dry. If your beans are not dry, it's just going to freeze, and they might burst, and they might lose their viability as well. So make sure they pass the hammer test. You know, if they squish when you hit it with a hammer, then it's not dry. And if they shatter and get all dusty, then they're definitely dry. So make sure they're dry. Put them in a mason jar and throw them in the freezer for about 3 days to a week, and then you'll protect yourself from bean weevils. So we're going to move on to the next dry seeded crop. So this one is lettuce. And so as you see here, these are some beautiful lettuce crops in their leafy stage. A lot of the techniques here will apply to a whole gamut of leafy greens, including things like spinach, arugula, mustard greens, all those sorts of things. They're all going to be relatively similar. And again, they're going to be similar to beans, but beans are a much larger seed. So you'll notice that that screening is a more common technique over here. So that picture on the left is what lettuce plants look like when they're approaching flowering. So they end up getting about 3 feet tall. They're a pretty big plant. And in the top right of the screen, that's what the seed looks like when you just thresh it into a bag. And what you're left with is a mass of like dandelion fluff and seeds. And the picture on the bottom right is what you're hoping to get your lettuce seeds to look like at the end of cleaning. To get your lettuce seed to the point where you can harvest it, it takes about 6 weeks after the point that you would stop eating them. And so this picture here is probably 4 weeks after you would eat it. So let it keep going, and you'll see flowers form, and then you'll see this white fluff stuff start forming. And when 50 to 70% of the seeds are ripe, that's when you'd harvest it. You could bring a plastic yogurt tub, and if you don't have one of those grocery bags I was talking about, and that's another way you can just sort of take the tip and just sort of bend it over into the yogurt container and just sort of bang it around a bit, and the seed should come loose pretty easily. Here's the slide that I should have put up before I started saying all those things. Another thing you can do is cut the plants and lay them in windrows, which will keep the seeds off the ground and allow the top ends to dry more readily. Keep a tarp underneath any lettuce plants that you'd want to be drying, because the seeds do shatter, and if they're just going to shatter all over your garage floor or inside your house, that's not going to be that great. Even a greenhouse, if you're planning to grow crops in there, you don't want to have your lettuce seed become a weed in there. Sometimes you can hang the plants. I've harvested the plants and I've wrapped little sandwich bags, or like the paper lunch bags, around groups of 4 or 5 lettuce plants, and then I've hung the plants upside down. And then when the seeds dry and shatter, they fall into the bag. And even when I want to thresh them, I can take the bag and just sort of squeeze it and get some of the seed out that way. It is a tricky way to clean perfectly, but there's many ways to thresh lettuce. You can stomp on them, you can hand thresh them. So remember, Manish was showing us how you could stomp on your beans. You can do something similar for lettuce. I often will I'll take the lettuce plant and I'll hold it and I'll just kind of strip the seeds off the end of it. And I'll do that into like a Rubbermaid bin. That's called hand threshing. And I find that that's pretty successful. A secondary threshing that I often do is I rub it through a screen or colander, something like that. That's a little bit, it's kind of a coarse screen though. You don't want it to be too thin. And then in that way, you can make sure that you're being really abrasive with the seed pods and making sure that they do crack. Because even though they do shatter, as many seeds as shatter, you also find a bunch that are really stubborn to leave the pods. And so I find this is a really easy way to make sure that the seeds leave the pods. And just as a note of encouragement for lettuce seed savers, I don't know that before the advent of large scale commercial seed saving operations, that people were that worried about whether or not their seed were perfectly clean. So if you're saving it for your friends and family, or even returning it to us at the Ottawa Seed Library, if the seed's dirty, that's not the end of the world. It's not going to prevent you from planting it, right? Because instead of taking when you plant lettuce seeds, there's like 300 or 400 seeds in a pack, and you kind of got to pinch them and spread them around. If it's not dirty, all that means is that you're going to be grabbing some sticks and dust and some extra plant matter, and if you plant that in your row with your seeds, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And you have to sow lettuce so thick anyway that that it's you may not have any problem with performance by doing it that way. So don't feel discouraged if you can't get your lettuce as clean as the seed companies can. They have very specialized equipment, and we're going to show you some techniques that'll help you get it as clean as you can. But I mean, the first few years that I was saving lettuce seeds, I was terrible at saving lettuce, and I was saving pounds of lettuce seeds. And it is not easy to clean. It takes a lot of patience and time. It's really dusty. I would highly recommend wearing a mask. Fortunately, with the pandemic, we all have tons and tons of masks now. So just pull one of those out when you're cleaning your lettuce seed. Screens are a very useful piece for saving lettuce seed once you have them threshed. So Manish is going to show how he does some lettuce screening in this next video.
Sure. So we're gonna show you another way of cleaning seeds using a screen like this. So this is a specialized screen. This is a specialized screen for like seed companies, but you can use something at home that you have, like any kind of sieve. You can get sieve in different sizes for different kind of seeds. So you just have to find the right sieve for the right kind of seeds. In this case, I'm cleaning some lettuce seeds. So this is with the husk. So this is with the husk and the seeds. And I'm gonna use this to remove the husk from the seeds. So uh, I'll put a batch here. All the husk is on top, almost clean seeds at the bottom. We can use a small machine to be able to clean. We can go over that process. You can do winnowing with the lettuce seeds as well to be able to clean it, and we can show you that after.
Similar to beans, once you have a lot of the big particulate removed by screening, you can use a fan to winnow it. A word of caution, lettuce is a very small and light seeded crop, so it's going to look a little bit different than beans. And you'll see in this video, watch how the lettuce seed you'll see is actually going into a farther bin, not the close bin. So controlling your fan speed is really important. One of the first years I did this, I was using a tiny desk fan because I wanted to have a much smaller stream of air than I did for beans.
As we saw how the lettuce seeds, we cleaned it using the screen. Now there was still a little bit of husk left in the seeds, so we're gonna just like winnow it using the fan. The distance, because the lettuce seeds are lighter, so the distance between the fan and your bin will matter a lot, because the small seeds will fly to the far and the fan speed would matter. So put it to the lowest setting you have there. I think I might have to adjust it a little bit. I think this might be the right. The wind is going from the other side.
Doing this in a sheltered
So
area is
this
better
the
as well.
inside setting outdoor, because the wind will affect. So some of my seeds went at the bottom there. So we're gonna try again. The wind has calmed down. As you can see, you have clean seeds at the base of it.
And that's good looking lettuce seed. So again, very similar to beans, except the beans are the seeds are a lot lighter. So you'll need to adjust your fan accordingly. For some of the other greens in this family, some of the seeds are very light, some of the seeds are very aerodynamic. So like a mustard seed is just very round. And so I find that they do fall a lot faster than a lettuce seed that's a little flat and thin. The wind seems to catch the lettuce seeds a lot easier than it does uh, the mustard seeds. And I should have mentioned earlier when we were talking about screens, one of the things I use to screen my lettuce is just simply a normal window screen. I have a few extra lying around in my house, and I find that I can get most of my lettuce seed through the window screen, and then all that's left is just a little bit of really light dust and the lettuce seed itself. And I also use colanders that I get from the dollar store or from a Value Village or something similar, and you have multiple different sizes that are more manageable in terms of, like, I mean, you can even take them right out of your kitchen if you don't want to buy any other ones, and I find that you can find the right screen with just a few different colanders. So now we're going to get into some wet seed extraction. That should cover all of what we've already covered. Should cover most of your dry seeded crops, your beans, your lettuce, your greens. A lot of your flower seeds are going to be very similar. Um, I feel like I'm missing major crops in there. I mean, your peas, corn, wheat, everything like that, you're going to find is all very similar to that. You thresh it, you screen it, you winnow it, and that's the process. For wet seeded crops, it's a little bit different. So we'll start with tomatoes. And Manish does a nice little video here of how to save tomato seed.
So we're gonna go over some wet seed extraction process. We're gonna go over a couple of things. some tomato, cucumber, and squash. So let's start with some tomatoes. So tomatoes is an easy process. You can cut the tomato into half, find a container, and squeeze your seeds. And you can use this for tomato sauce or compost. So to make your job faster, what I do is I fill up my can with water and just squeeze the full tomato inside it. And so you can see the seeds are floating, and with tomato seeds there's a jelly around it. So if you let this ferment for 2-3 days, then the jelly coating around it will get to be eaten by the fungus, and then you can the seeds will fall at the very bottom. As in some cases you see they have already fallen down, but they still have that jelly around it. So
And Manish was horrified when he realized he said fungus, but what he meant was, I believe, a bacteria eats or ferments that causes the gel coating to be eaten. And so when you do this technique, what happens is all of the gunk and all the stuff that's not seed floats to the very top, and all of the heavy seed and full seed pods sinks to the bottom. And so this is what I was talking about melon seed saving earlier. This is the technique that I added to melon seeds. In the past, I treated them more like a squash and would just extract them and let them dry. But once I started doing this, I got better results. This is what tomato seed looks like when it's fermenting. When you said you could do it 2 or 3 days, that's 100% accurate. I like to leave mine a week just because I garden on the weekends. So I do the extraction on a Sunday, and I come back the following Saturday, and then do my my cleaning off. If this is more of like a large scale piece here, like I think these are buckets, but I use like for some of my smaller crops, I use just like a little plastic container that you would take, like a snack in for lunch or something like that. And then it'll be a smaller batch, but it'll still be it'll still be worth doing. After they're fermented, you can screen them through a sieve like this and rinse them off. Honestly, I don't even bother with the sieve anymore. What I've found is that if you fill these buckets with water and you dump all the gunk off into your compost bin, you do that 2-3 times, and in the end, you're just going to have clean water with clean seed in the bottom. So most of the time, that's all I do. I don't even bother sieving them like this. But to each their own. As you start doing the technique, you'll see what you like. But like Manish was showing in his video, the seed goes all the way to the bottom, and then the more water you have, the more stratified all the gunk is. And so you might have some heavier gunk there, some really light gunk up there. And so when you dump it off, you'll get the lightest stuff first, and then you fill it up again and it stratifies even more. And now all of a sudden your medium heavy stuff is now floating at the top. So I found that that's a really good technique for pouring off your tomato gunk. After you separate it from water, you just put it on a paper towel or a paper plate or even a paper bag or something like that, and let it sit like this for a week. And then you'll have seed that's very papery, and you just kind of rub it in your hands and it'll fall apart into your into whatever storage vessel you want to have for your tomato seed. The person who put together this workshop said that once she had put her tomato seeds on a dinner plate in her kitchen, and on top of the fridge or something like that, and her husband had come and put it in the dishwasher and lost all of her tomato seeds. So do be careful about what dishes you're using, because some people might think that they're compost or not to be saved. Now we'll get into talking about some of the vine wet-seeded crops. These are really easy to get started with as well. I should say tomatoes are a really great crop to get started in. Beans and tomatoes are both really easy, one wet, one dry as well. Lettuce, again, very easy to save as well. The trickier part with them is the cleaning. Squash is another easy one for saving the seed. And Manish is going to show how to extract squash seeds from, I believe that's a zucchini. But I'm sure if you've carved a pumpkin, you know how to do it.
This is a batch. Go ahead.
It's good. Ready to go?
Yeah.
So the squash is the same idea. You leave the squash in the plant way past its maturity, and the seeds at that time are mature enough. So in this case, we see squash is huge. So we can try cutting it longitudinal way. As you can see, the seeds are here in this fibrous mess. So just take a bin and take all this. This is easiest way to clean using water. So basically we're gonna squeeze out these seeds from the fibrous matter.
So once it's in the water, you can just start squeezing the pulp, and the seeds will detach from the fibrous mass. And again, with seed saving, you can let some seeds go. You don't need to get 100%.
So just take all the fiber out.
Yep. Might be an easier way of doing this. Hey, I have a mesh I can bring.
So the squash techniques apply to all different types of squash, whether you're doing zucchinis, delicatas, spaghetti squash, butternut squash, pumpkins, anything like that. Once you remove it from the plant and you wash all the seeds, you just got to let them dry. So same as the tomatoes, you can put them on a screen, you can put them on in a colander, you can put them on a paper plate or anything, paper or cardboard or paper towels, and they should dry over time. This is Manish showing cucumbers. They're more like a hybrid between squash and tomatoes, but he'll handle it.
Over some cucumber seeds. So take a cucumber, cut into half. So with cucumber, you have to make sure it's way past its maturity. We eat cucumbers when they are very young and tender, because that's how we like it. But for seeds, you want the seeds to be mature fully inside the cucumber. As you can see in this case, it's fully mature. So we're gonna take a container and just take out the seeds. So with cucumber, it's the same idea. If you leave them to ferment for just like that for a few days, the coating around the seeds will like be melted away, and the seeds will fall at the very bottom. So with cucumber, same idea. 2-3 days. If you leave them, the seeds will fall at the bottom.
So very similar to tomatoes. Ferment them, let them pour off the water or screen them, and then let them dry on a plate. So that's the end of wet seed extraction. It's quite a bit simpler, but maybe a little bit, not as fun, a little dirtier than your dry seeded extraction. But in the end, we're using water to do a lot of the work for us. And that's removing some of the gunk and the bad stuff we don't want on our seed. And then one of the benefits of this wet seeded extraction is that it kind of is similar to winnowing in that the lighter seed floats and the heavier seed sinks. And so if you want to make sure you get your top quality seed, this wet seeded extraction kind of is 2 steps in one. You clean the seed, it gets less disease when you ferment it, and then the heaviest seed falls to the bottom. You pour off all the light seed, and you're left with your best quality crop. In the end, it's a lot. I prefer wet seeded extraction when I can use it. I just find it's a lot more straightforward, and it's a lot less bulky. You'll find when you're saving beans and lettuce, the plants are big and you have to have a lot of them lying around in order to get the seed clean. So there's something to be said for both though. So now that we've cleaned our seed, we have to think about storing it. So there are conditions for optimum storage, and you want your crops cool and dry, protected from insects and rodents, especially those pesky bean weevils. And you want the temperature to be stable. And also putting it in a clean jar doesn't hurt either. So basically, if you can accomplish dry and dark, that's kind of the main things. You'll get a lot of mileage out of your seed just from dryness alone. If you can provide it in like a front hall closet that gets a lot less sun, over time it'll make an impact on your seed longevity. And the cooler the better as well for your seed longevity. But from a home gardener standpoint, just keeping them dry, you're probably going to get 4 or 5 years out of your beans minimum, provided they're dry enough and you've got your heaviest seed. Tomatoes, I've heard upwards of 4 to 10 years. It depends on the crop, but you should get a lot of lifespan out just by keeping them cool and dry and dark. Dry is your priority though. So that's all there is on storage. Oh no, there's not. There's this. When you do store them, make sure you label them too. This season, you might remember what your seeds are, but when you come back in 3 years and maybe you haven't planted that seed in a couple of years, it's going to be hard to remember exactly what it was. Is that a provider bean, or is that a gold rush bean, or is that a wild goose bean? You're never really going to know unless you make a good label of it. Make sure you keep the year, the variety name. For bonus points, you can put in some characteristics of the season if you like it was a wet year, these did really well, or I found that I saved the seeds from only the largest fruits. Little things like that will help. You'll be happy if you do those sorts of those observations and record keeping. Just checking over my notes. But yeah, that's really all there is to it. To storage, just keep them labeled, keep them dry. This is an example of a seed rack that you might find. You could put this in your basement or something. That's what we've done. We just put a shelf in our not our laundry room, but like a utility room close to the laundry, and it's in airtight mason jars, a little cooler down there, and we've had no problem with our seed saving, or seed storage. This is just some information on seed longevity. It does vary by species. So things like onions, parsley, parsnip, salsify, they don't store for very long. And then you can see that beans, 3 years. cauliflowers and your rutabagas are up to 4 years. Your melons and radish are up at 5. It does vary by crop. It does vary by region. It does vary by storage capacity. But these are good rules of thumbs to keep in mind when you're saving your seed. Like I think I got like 10 pounds of parsley seed a few years ago. It was the craziest thing. And then I couldn't get rid of it. So now it's all spoiled, basically. It's really frustrating. And less than 30% of it germinates. So when I sowed it this spring, even, I had to put, I planted something like 20 times the thickness that you normally would, just so that I have enough to germinate. Which is a thing you can do too. I mean, this general rule for typical storage is it applies to keeping seeds at about a 75 to 80% storage or germination rate. So for every 20 seeds you plant, 15 would germinate. A parsnip after 1 year might drop below that, but after 2 years it might be at 20%. So then all you got to do is sow thicker. If you're a home gardener, you can get away with that more than a commercial grower. So you just got to keep that in mind. And if you like, you can test your seeds by wetting them in a paper towel and letting them, keep them moist like you're watering a plant, and you can see how many germinate out of 10 or 20. And so that's a good thing you can do in the winter when you're waiting to see what seeds you can use. I've already talked about this. I do highly recommend labeling everything from the moment you plant them until you put them in storage. And if you are really, again, for bonus points, if you want to take notes at every stage along the seed's life cycle, that is a good practice too. I have this dream that I'm going to do everything with flashcards, even though, everything's digital, so I don't know why I do that. But if I had flashcards and I have them in my garden shed, and then every time I go out to check my crops, I bring out my flashcard little box, and maybe my few seed crops I'm going to be saving that year, I just write an observation and a date. And seed saving criteria, maybe it's like, hey, the beans look really, there's most of them are straight, but some of them aren't. I'm only going to save seed from the straight ones. I've marked them with a pink tape or something like that. And so then next time you come back and look at your beans, you can grab your flashcard and be like, oh yeah, I liked that last time. That's great. Do I still like that? Are the ones I flagged still the ones that I like? And in doing that, you can end up doing a nice selection of your bean crops. And then your record plus your label can then all go into storage together. One thing to keep in mind is some markers do fade in the sun. So make sure that your materials are going to withstand the rigors of the weather. So for those of you that are Ottawa Seed Library members, if you want to return seed, there's a big blue bin in front of the barn at the Just Food Farm. And the address is on the screen here, and we'll be sending it out in a newsletter. I apologize for the typo. The address is Pepin Court, so 2391 Pepin Court. But you're also able to mail your seeds in. So you can get some coin envelopes, or you can Google how to make DIY seed envelopes from scrap paper. And you can tuck your seeds into those envelopes. When you're sending them back, please clearly label the seeds. Put the vegetable, the variety, your name, and the year you saved them on there. And then that's some of the information that we have in our records for when we redistribute them to the community. And the address, how you can send them to us, is there at the bottom of the slide. And again, you'll get this in a newsletter in the sidebar at a later date as well. And that's all I had for the workshop today.